Okay, hi everybody. My name's Paul McGee. I'm the Director of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research. I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I want to pay my respects to all of their elders, past and present, and to any Aboriginal people here today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Hamish Sewell. Hamish is the founder and co-director of the Australian-based Locative audio app Soundtrails. He's an award-winning radio documentary maker, and his work has been broadcast in Australia, America, and New Zealand. His writing has been shortlisted for the Queensland Premier's Award, and he's worked as an oral historian with the National Library of Australia on most of their leading projects. Now, I invited Hamish to come and present to us today because I saw a presentation on this work at the Cultural Studies Association annual conference back in Adelaide in late November of last year. And I just thought this work was so fabulous and so relevant to so much of the work we're doing in various areas across heritage and Indigenous studies. So I'm very excited to have Hamish presenting to us today. Please welcome him to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Okay, so my name's Hamish Sewell, and I've got this clicker thing here. Hi, everybody. My name's Hamish Sewell. This is my business partner, the wonderful Bettina Walter. Together, we run Soundtrails, which, for the sake of this presentation, I'll call here a locative audio app. The app is freely available on Android and iOS and brings to life on location voices, sounds, and stories via mobile phones that are GPS triggered. If you download the app, or alternatively, you go to the Soundtrails website, I'm sure you'll get a sense of what's going on. So today, I'm going to talk about narratives of places and people. And before I begin, I want to just point out that Soundtrails is just one application out there at the moment. And I'll refer often to Soundtrails as a platform being many kind of components. There's a back end, there's a front end, there's also a website. And these types of locative audio apps have been around for about 20 years now. They really started to kick up, of course, once the GPS signal was deregulated in the early 2000s, and then smartphones brought in GPS capacity. And so around that time, there was a sort of flourishing of creativity where a lot of people were starting to explore how stories might be fashioned across places and spaces. Around the world, there's a score of some very gifted locative audio producers and storytellers. I just want to kind of gesture at that and say that Soundtrails is just one of these products out there today. If you look at apps like Sonic Maps or Echoes, or you check out producers like Francesca Panetta or another one called Duncan Speakman, you can see that people are really kind of pushing new ground in this area. If you want to see how broad the church of locative audio is now, you might want to check out this website. It's called Walk, Listen, Create. And every year, Walk, Listen, Create hosts this international competition called Soundwalk September. And you'll see just how diverse, how creative, how dynamic this sort of field of creative storytelling is becoming with something like this, where you've got place-based fictions, you've got time jumping, you've got, a range of different approaches to this idea of telling stories on place. So that said, Soundtrails is a little bit different to other locative audio apps. Why? Well, because we own and we control not only the platform that we build on, but we also curate the work that we publish. So unlike a creative locative audio walk that's, say, a one-off project and that's using another platform, maybe it's launched or it's published for something like a festival, an arts festival, we have a different kind of contract going on in that a lot of the projects that we've worked on to date, we have this kind of ongoing relationship with the community and the people who we're working with. So we not only have a vested interest in the platform and the success of the platform, but we've got an interest in the production of the stories and developing this kind of relationship with the communities which we're often working with. So we're continually trying to improve this. You could say on one level that we're spread too thin because we're not just focusing on the platform, or we're not just focusing on the production. We're basically holding all these kind of different aspects to the process. So one of the dilemmas with locative audio is how to underpin it commercially. And I think this has seen over the years a lot of locative audio apps disappear because they weren't able to sustain themselves commercially. We basically cut our teeth through doing what we call commissioned sound trails. So commissioned sound trails are where we will assign a professional producer. They'll go and work in a community and they'll build a project. We've been commissioned by things like the education sector, local councils, national parks, and we've got on the published side of sound trails, we've got around 25 sound trails which are operational in Australia at the moment. So we've got things like Mile Creek, the Mile Creek Massacre site, which is in northern New South Wales. We've just published one recently, which is down in Melbourne around the peace movement there. And basically, we're publishing those projects on our platform. Now, with that relationship that we have with communities, we've got this kind of ongoing trust that we need to keep. We need to make sure that they're across what we're doing. We need to make sure we're across things like release forms, permission. We need to make sure that we've got this abiding relationship with these communities to make sure that we've got an understanding here. And I think that makes us a little bit different than other platforms who might be, for instance, just focusing on the production and using another platform, or they might be focusing on the platform and then anyone can come and use it. So things like release forms, ownership, legal agreements, all of that stuff is kind of written into the projects that we work on when we publish them. I hope that kind of makes sense. There's 3 different models that we've built Soundtrails on commercially. And the first one, as I said, is this idea of the commissioned Soundtrails, where we go in, we're commissioned, we're paid a certain amount, we assign a professional producer to go in and work. That's been what we've cut our teeth on over the last while. The other thing which we've brought in the last few years is this idea of independent producers being able to publish their work on Soundtrails, where they might negotiate any money that's involved. They might negotiate the production, all of that sort of stuff. And then we have permission from them through a license form to be able to publish this work on Soundtrails. Now, as I said, we curate Soundtrails, so we want to make sure that stuff is of a certain caliber. So we are careful to make sure that we enter into a conversation with the independent producers to make sure we're dealing with people who know what they're doing. And of course, Soundtrails is underlying this whole process is this idea of a knowledge of how to use audio and storytelling. And the final one, which we've basically introduced into Soundtrails now, is what we're calling the Soundtrails Academy. And the Soundtrails Academy basically is a teaching tool or a framework for learning how to build audio walks. It's geared for the classroom situation, for universities or industries to play around with using this with things like a whole range of teaching modules, which we've got to step people through to, things like considerations, how to work with community, or, even simple things like just getting on and getting into the back end of the system. Oops, sorry. So for 20 years now, I've pretty much worked in the digital arena. And the stories and the work that I've been involved in are all incredibly relational to place. From oral histories in the Norfolk Island, to radio features down the Murray-Darling Basin system, to community-run podcasts in regional Queensland. I'm very much a product of this idea of digital storytelling. And over the last 20 years, I've witnessed a slow and gradual shift away from this kind of increasing desire to kind of see and hear stories about place, which are through computers, through to this kind of idea that we might actually be able to experience stories on country, on place. And by and large, I would say this is facilitated through this kind of idea of GPS. While there's a kind of a range of place-based kind of technologies, you know, you might have, for instance, QR codes, or you might have some sort of Bluetooth technology. I'd say GPS overall has been the big game changer. So if you think of the difference between a video on a website about a river, where we're watching in our study and we're seeing a story about a river, as opposed to actually being on the river and hearing voices, sounds, and stories around us as we're going down that river. It's a very different proposition, an incredibly different proposition. With the latter, the visual cues are all around us. With the bridge, the building, or the trees, we've got the wind, we've got the smell, we're actually there in our body. Now, this is not to suggest that locative audio is necessarily going to win the game here. I think we have to be realistic. We live in a very highly visually dominated culture. And audio today is completely dwarfed by the sheer enormity of money that's involved in the media machine and its visual splendor. But unlike videos or virtual reality, or even a lot of augmented reality that continually takes us back to our screens and offers us a simulated experience, here something different is going on. Here we can move. And the storied world is all around us. And what's more, I am at the center of my storied world, with all its resonances to what's around me. So how does this work? How does the storied world work? Well, essentially it works through a platform like Soundtrails. And what you've got to do is you've got to create these fields, or what we call hotspots, in relation to a GPS spot, latitude and longitude. So I've just thrown up a couple of fields there on the back end of Soundtrails, and you can see what they look like. Now, into these fields, we would add digital media. And in our case, we're adding, our app is geared around audio, so that when you walk into one of these fields, that audio will be choreographed to do something. The audio will play, or you know, you might see some images. So something will happen when you walk into that field. So that's the way that basically most locative audio apps are configured. They're configured through this idea of fields, and then there will be certain kind of tricks or algorithms that will kick that audio up. So when a person is on site and they've downloaded something like Soundtrails and they walk into, say, this site there, this orange round field there, then chances are they might know it's there. They might see it's there and they can walk towards it and they can walk into that field, and then whammo, it starts to play. But of course, there's more to it with this storytelling. What if this audio field is invisible? What if they're walking across this particular site and suddenly someone is whispering in their ear, "Hello there, what do you think you're doing here, imposter?" Or conversely, let's say it is visible on their phone, But the voice whispering to us only plays within this GPS footprint. In other words, if we walk out of that field, it suddenly stops or it fades down, and we don't get all of what they're saying. The only way we can get all of what they're saying is if we walk back in, and then hopefully it continues where it left off. Or conversely, we get it playing when we've walked into that field, and then we walk out and the damn thing won't stop until it's finished. So I'm just pointing out here just 3 very simple conventions that you can set on these fields to determine the storytelling experience. And with each locative audio app that's out there on the market today, they'll each have their set of conventions. And generally, most of them will be playing with these questions, which I'm raising, but some of them will bring in other different things. And I think you need to be careful here, because at this point, as producers or storytellers, you can get very carried away with the functionality that's written into the platforms, and you can actually lose sight of the fact that this is also about audio storytelling. It's not just about the bells and whistles on the functionality of the app. Because what of the voices? You know, whose voice are we listening to? Who's speaking to us as we walk into a place? Are they speaking to us, or are they speaking to someone else as we listen in? They're having a conversation. It's like we're sort of being a voyeur. Or even stranger, are they talking to someone else about us, about the imposter who is now walking past their building? And who are they anyway? Are they an anonymous voice of authority telling us where to go and what we're seeing? Or are they maybe someone famous, which is why we're here in the first place, because we're a big fan of this person who's famous and we know they'll be talking to us? Or are they someone who's got a deep relationship to this building where we're walking past? Maybe they're like the janitor of this building. Maybe they have some kind of implicit authority and connection to the place where we're walking. So hopefully by throwing out a few of these questions, you don't get bamboozled by what's going on. Hopefully what you do is you just get a sense that locative audio is creating quite a different sort of narrative toolbox to this idea of more linear stories, this idea of a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a very different proposition than a novel where you pick up a book and you might read words on a page. Locative narratives don't have to be linear. Locative narratives can play with us. They can fold themselves around us as we move, from very intimate moments in quiet corners to epic film scores in places with commanding views, or to pieces of information which we pick up if only we can find where it is. Okay, so I'm now going to turn to a number of examples from the Soundtrails narratives. And these are projects which we're either about to publish or we have published. And many of these are ones that I've been involved in. And when I was looking at this presentation today, I was kind of realizing that I'm sorry, they're all ones, well, bar one, most of them are ones that I've been involved in. And partly that's because I'm probably quite passionate about them, or I know kind of the backstory about them. We have certainly worked with quite a few other producers now, and this is not to suggest that this work that I'm pointing to is any better than theirs. So when I go into these examples of Soundtrails, well, first of all, we're going to give it some context. We'll look at how this project came about. Then we'll go and we'll have a look at what I'm calling the back end of the platform and the app. And these are the two sort of wings to the storytelling animal, so to speak, in that you've got this system where people have got to come in, a producer's got to come in, and they build their locative audio project. And the app, of course, is what's publicly available when people are on the ground and they're doing the storytelling experience. And then we'll go in and we'll have a listen to just a short extract from some audio. Okay. So the first example is consent. And just a little heads up here. This is about, doesn't go in too graphically, but it's just a little bit about a rape case in Canada, which is certainly still playing itself out. So, Consent was produced by the late Canadian producer, Chris Brooks, who was an early adopter of locative audio. Chris tragically passed away last year, and we're now working with Rebecca Nolan, a Canadian producer and a friend of Chris's, to republish a number of Chris's locative audio works. This is what we'd call part of our indie license with Soundtrails. This hasn't been published yet. We expect it will be quite soon. So at its heart, consent is about raising awareness around issues of rape and the differing interpretations of this idea. And it does this, I think, very inventively by zeroing in on one of Canada's more famous rape cases in recent years and doing it through the storytelling toolkit of locative audio. This rape case, amazingly, is still playing itself out through the Canadian system, and the policeman who was convicted, I think, has done time in jail. So at the heart of the issue of consent is a situation in 2017 where a young and intoxicated woman left a nightclub in downtown St. John's, Newfoundland, late at night. In a bid to get home, she took a ride in a police patrol car with an on-duty policeman. At her apartment, and upon realising that she had lost her keys, the policeman helped her break inside. From here on, their stories differ. She says she was raped. He says she led her on. So consent works closely with the publicly available court transcripts. And I think it quite skillfully shifts between her account and his account to build up a story that is set along the streets of St. John's and various landmarks along the way, and largely corresponds chronologically to the events of that night. So here we can see this idea of the back-end builder on the left, and we can also see what people, when they will have this, when it's publicly available, will have on their app. You can see that basically it's got the start point down the bottom there. It meanders along the road, along one of those main roads. We've got various points where the audio plays. We've got a deviation at one point, which sort of deviates, and then it loops back round and it finishes there. You can also see too that on the right-hand side of the builder, we've got different colorations for some of those hotspots. And that signals basically that the producer is saying these hotspots will have certain functionality. So for instance, down the bottom there, you can see that we've got a large orange field. Now, this is at the start point, and I'm not exactly sure, but I think what Rebecca's done is she said this start point here is going to play from beginning to the end. So once someone moves into that field, that one is going to play. So this is almost mandatory that you will hear this. Whereas those red fields, they will basically play within the hotspot field. So we're just playing here with different narrative conventions using this idea of fields, audio fields. And on the right-hand side, you can see what it might look like on the app itself when you're actually on the ground. Now, I've taken the liberty here on the app of turning on this little secret function, which most people won't know, and that's to turn on the hidden hotspots. And you can see this kind of green line around certain fields, and that says that's invisible. In other words, once people are in that field, it will start to play, but they don't necessarily know it's there. I hope that makes sense. Don't get too confused here, okay? So, I don't know exactly how long consent takes to walk, But I think another really clever thing that Chris has done, and Chris and Rebecca have done, if you see the titling of the hotspots, you can see location 6, 2:35 a.m. Once someone walks into that hotspot, that will kick up. It will have a photograph and it will have that title, 2:35 a.m. And my understanding is that those hotspots correspond to certain places along the journey, along the narrative. So I think 2:35 is largely when she left the hotel, when she came out of the hotel, and then maybe the next hotspot's where she gets into the police car. So again, it's this kind of idea of a chronological journey that corresponds not only to the events of the night, but also landmarks along the way. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're standing down there at the bottom. You've arrived here in St. John's, you've downloaded Soundtrails, you've downloaded Consent app, and you're listening to this one, which is mandatory. That's the orange one down the bottom. This is what you'd hear.
I was drunk.
I'm a police officer.
On the night of the 21st December 2014.
I figured it would be safer to go with a police officer than with a cab driver.
I had no responsibility.
Place your right hand on the Bible, please.
Why did you not follow policy?
Oh, and then we danced!
I just didn't. I dishonored my wife, then I disrespected my uniform.
I figured there wouldn't be a point in going to the police.
Why is that?
Because it was a police officer. And I was drunk.
So Chris is quite a skillful sound producer. I think he's quite skillful. I think he's done a really interesting job here. He's taken those court transcripts. He's brought in some voice actors. He's obviously knows his way around sound editing. It's a very visceral kind of sound. We're both kind of in the courtroom. We've got things like, you know, the sound of the gravel from the judge, the gavel from the judge. We've got courtroom coughing. And then we also go to in situ places when they're talking about being outside, footsteps, closing of doors. There's a real sense of actuality as we're walking through this type of storied experience. I think it's, for me, a very sort of skillful approach to this kind of education awareness or raising awareness. And also notice too that we don't necessarily have anyone narrating this. We've not got anyone talking to us. It's like we're a fly on the wall while these events are kind of unfolding around us. So that's consent. Okay, the next one that I want to talk about is one which was published last year, and this is called the Portland Soundtrail. So Portland was produced by myself and Dr. Virginia Madsen from Macquarie University. And it's around this town called Portland, which is just in the western side of the Blue Mountains, out of about 2 hours out of Sydney. And in the 1900s, Portland was one of the big cement manufacturing towns in Australia. It was on the scale of some of Australia's biggest industries for the time. And it's actually dubbed the town that built Sydney on the account of the tonnage of cement that they hauled out of that town. So Portland, on one hand, I think was considered a very successful industry. It went for nearly 100 years. But it's also too a very divided town. There were the managers up on this place called Bellevue Hill of Portland, and then there were kind of the workers down in the town centre. There was a lot of union activity that went on over the years. The workforce was largely uneducated, and there were a lot of casualties or fatalities from deaths associated with the work over the years. So we were commissioned to build the Portland Soundtrail by the Portland Business Association. The town has been really struggling to find a new direction where they're going. And I think that whole sort of Lithgow area is looking for a new sort of direction away from just being coal dependent. And of course, because quite a lot of people come to Portland to check out these amazing sort of heritage buildings which are still in the town, they wanted to provide people some sort of experience for when they're there. Okay, so I've got a few images up here, but again, on the left, you can see the builder, which is where we might build the Portland Soundtrail. That's where the producer would build it. You can see that we've got different coloured hotspots, blue, we've got a green one, we've got red ones. And again, these correspond to the slightly different settings you would have on those audio fields and how they might play. And over on the right, you can see what it looks like on the app. So for instance, if you look at the blue one on the left, that is an invisible field. On the right-hand side, you can't see that one. So in other words, you've got this kind of opportunity to play with surprise using locative audio. And there's quite a few sort of, tricks in your toolkit here for producing these narratives. Okay, so the audio walk itself takes around 1 hour, just over 1 hour. And it starts there at the start point, which is next to the kind of the main industrial precinct. It goes right through the industrial precinct, then it comes out on the main street, one of the main streets called Woollywaw Street. And down Woollywaw Street, you've got all the workers' cottages as you walk past. And then you go up round this old cement quarry pit, which is now a beautiful lake. People do trout fishing and stuff there today. It's got seats. It looks really kind of bucolic and beautiful. And then you come back round through the town and then you walk through the park back to the swimming pool. So it's this big kind of loop. So one of the interesting parts of the town for us, and there's two really interesting narrative parts of the town. And one of them concerned this idea of the men and the quarry. And the other one concerned this remarkable story we got around a woman who was basically trying to contest the compensation payment that she got from the company when her husband was crushed to death. So these are what I would consider in terms of the narrative structure of the Portland Soundtrail, two of the sort of apogee points. Otherwise, what we've got are a range of kind of stories that sort of really build out this idea of an industrial town that's got this remarkable story. Portland was quite a remarkable town in its own way. But we've interviewed around 15 people, and we've got things like, we've got testimonies from the mothers and the daughters whose dads were killed. We've got the women who worked in the office along with the managers. We've got managers' sons talking. We've got the men who were servicing the generators. We've got the guys who were driving and hauling the cement out of the pits. So there's a range of different stories in there, but I think one of the pivotal points in the whole sort of narrative is this idea of walking around this lake today. Because while you've got these lovely seats, you've got this blue, clear water, for the locals, it's a lot more complex than that. And so for me and for Ginia and I think we kind of recognise what a powerful opportunity it was to really dive into sort of the lives, the history, the complexity that was involved in the pits themselves. So this one here on the top left, the mill pond, I think presented for us this really great opportunity. It takes around 10 minutes to walk around here. And we saw this very much as this sound montage where you can really reflect on sort of all the resonances that are sort of connected with this site.
I suppose I don't know, the men probably thought they had to do what they had to do and they just did it, and accidents happened.
Accidentally received. Accidentally received. Accidental death.
Witness Mr. Miller said that he had never yet been at an inquest where a mines inspector had been asked to give evidence. He would ask the coroner why that had not been done. The coroner admitted that there was a state duty to be performed. He found the deceased met his death from injuries accidentally received in a fall of stone.
Accidentally received.
Accidentally received.
Accidental death.
Woe and betide us if we weren't in by the 11:30 whistle.
Well, they use angelic night in the early stages, and then in later stages they use nitropryl. Put a detonator in it and blow the whole face out in one go.
And you know, all of those. You're coming up to the old quarry, or what's now.
Okay, so the Portland Sound Trail, I think, in examples like this, I think are again, like consent, they're quite performative. You've got two different voices there, a male voice and a female voice. They're kind of doubling in different roles during this audio walk, and that sometimes they might actually be giving us quite clear instructions as to where to go. And then other times they're actually picking up roles of characters which we sort of bring in. The young boy who's about to join the manufacturing plant, the woman who's basically got a husband who's been killed. So these voices are taking up many different character roles within this audio walk experience. Okay, so the next one that I'd like to get to is called the Aboriginal Diggers. So the Aboriginal Diggers is one of a number of sound trails that we've built working alongside Aboriginal communities. This one is at the Aboriginal section of the Moree Cemetery in northwest New South Wales. While many cemeteries have a Catholic section, an Anglican section, this one has an Aboriginal section. This, I believe, is quite unusual. And one of the stories in the Aboriginal Diggers section is actually discussing this. Did they designate it an Aboriginal section because it was racism at the time and they wanted to sort of peel them off to one side? Or did they do it because they recognised that it's really important in the Aboriginal community to be buried with their ancestors? So this woman here, who we can see a picture of, it wouldn't have been possible to have done this project without this woman. Her name is, she's Auntie Nolene Briggs-Smith. And she's checking out the sound trail here, actually, when we're just about to publish it. Nolene is a Gomeroi woman, and her family lived in the Moree top camp after being forced off the land, I think in the 1940s. As a child, Nolene came to the cemetery every weekend to pay her respects to her elders. Over time, she became a custodian and site of the Aboriginal section. And when the section was particularly run down, she undertook its restoration. So in the process of this restoration, she did a lot of research on the grave sites, and in particular, the local war veterans, the Aboriginal war veterans who were buried here. So Nolene is absolutely pivotal in this location-based narrative. And I think just, hats off to these people. They're knowledge holders. They are the ones who basically come with this information. And through their generosity and their willingness to be involved, stories like this are possible. Without them, they would not be possible. So we were introduced to Nolene by another Gomeroi woman called Sharon Cook, who worked for Catholic Schools Education. Sharon wanted the kids in the Catholic school sector to be able to go to some places in Moree and to be able to have cultural immersive experiences. So Sharon asked Nolene if Nolene would work with us. Nolene was thrilled because she wanted to see more people know about this site. And over time, we became pretty good friends. So again, similar scenario. We've got the builder on the left and we've got the app on the right. Now, it's probably hard to tell, but this is actually probably one of the smallest size footprints we've got with Soundtrails. The area itself is really only about 200 metres long and about 50 metres wide. And on this sound trail, you can see there are 8 stories. They're the red ones. So when you walk into those stories, they kick up with images and they'll start to play automatically. You walk out of those ones, they'll fade down. Walk back in, it'll play, and then when it's finished, it stops. Otherwise, what you've got is you've got a bunch of invisible hotspots going on. You've got the blue ones, which are basically what we call background. It'll just play on a loop. It creates a kind of ambient experience. And then at the entrance there, you can see at the path entrance there on the left, you've got a green one. Now we've used a green one because it's got an algorithm, which means it will play from the beginning to the end, and that's a Welcome to Country. Welcome to Country is by a gospel Aboriginal singer called Roger Knox. He speaks some Kamilaroi, he introduces us, and then you walk into that section and you've really got a medley of different sounds. You're able to kind of glide in and out of different stories. So the one that I want to focus on is a story on this guy called Percy Sewell. And we can see here on the right-hand side, we can see his daughter, Linda Boney, and she's holding a picture of Percy Sewell. So Percy basically was part Chinese, he was part Aboriginal. He left Moree. He was one of those few Aboriginal people who managed to pretend that he wasn't Aboriginal, and he signed up for the Second World War. He was promptly locked up in Changi as soon as he was overseas. He was brutalised, and then he returned back to Moree, to a highly segregated and I think quite racist sort of environment. And he lived on the riverbank not far away from where Linda and the other kids grew up with their mum. So I want to pick up this story on Percy. I can't play all of it, but I just want to pick up the story where Linda's just basically saying how she would go out and meet her dad on the riverbank after he came back.
Rained. He'd have his army hat on and his army
Bring
coat.
that volume up a bit.
If you went over town to buy a shirt and pants, they'd always have to be khaki. He had a visit with us at our Nana and Pop's place. We'd always have to see him on the veranda, and he'd always have his little tobacco tin, log cabin tobacco tin, and Dad used to keep his medals in this tin, and he'd always carry them with him. And when he'd come to visit us, he'd always bring these medals out and tell us a story about him being, you know, in the war and how hard it was, and it was always about the war.
At the mission there, and poor old Percy Sewell, and then he was there, he used to dance. Dad'd sing. It was good, they could sing too and dance.
When Dad used to get on the grog a bit, it used to be a very traumatic time for him. We were never to wake him up when he was in a deep sleep, because he thought he was in the war, and he'd grab us by the arm and really think he was fighting Japs.
So one thing which we don't get to there is the fact that Percy basically disappeared one day. He became a missing person. He got into an altercation one day and he disappeared. His clothes were found at the local dump, but Percy was never seen again. So I think what we've got here is this kind of resonance that this site is an extremely kind of powerful sort of site in terms of sort of the history that it holds, the people's stories that it holds, the connection that this place has to the broader Aboriginal community. And I think you've got this really interesting situation with locative audio, and that's that relationship that voices and these people have to these places and the stories which are written underneath the surface. And I think that's where locative audio just really has a power and an authenticity here that I think few other media can have. And I don't think many people have cottoned on to that yet. So just quickly, we'll just have a quick look. Goonoowigall is another example of a project we worked on. This is at an Aboriginal fringe camp just out of Inverell. And we work with the Yukambal community there. And the way that we, again, came in to be able to do this story was this woman here, Lizzie Connors. She was 90, I think 94 at the time, and she'd raised something like 26 children. She was the senior Aboriginal elder within that community, and she and my company had a relationship. We'd done work together. So again, just like Auntie Nolene Briggs-Smith, you've got these people, and if you get them basically on board, suddenly doors open and these projects go ahead with an understanding, with trust, with relationships. But otherwise, I think without Lizzie being on board, this project wouldn't have gone ahead as well. Goonoowigall Soundtrail really is a testimony to strength and resilience with this community. They lived here 7 kilometres out of Inverell. It was an Aboriginal fringe camp. It takes about, I think about an hour to go around. And there's some pretty tough stories in here. There's stories of the impact that the welfare coming and trying to take the kids away had. There's stories around the control that the Aboriginal protector had on things like their fathers who needed to go and find seasonal work. The women, meanwhile, were at home with the kids. If the kids didn't go to school, they could again get taken away. So there was a lot of pressure on this family to try to do the right thing. It was a pretty tough gig. The story we're going to have a look at now is this one here. This is quite a nice story. It's a feel-good story. And this is with Hilda Connors, Beryl Heppy and Hilda Connors. And these guys lived here. They are Lizzie Connors' nieces. And they lived here. And you can see the sign there today, which sort of attests to the community.
Flatten it all out, mainly from the dump.
It was a 2-bedroom and sort out a little, like the lounge part, and the kitchen was joined together.
That was at the beginning. Remember, Dad built that other little part on, and that was our full kitchen there. The big fireplace was on one side of the house, and Mum and Dad's bed was there, eh? And a little part next to it, which was dirt floor, that was for our water to keep it cool, eh? And our food was stored in there. Actually, our father was a real good skilled carpenter, builder. He cut the logs. How on earth he got them down to here is beyond me. And he actually lined the rooms with the cardboard boxes that we used to bring our groceries home in. The girls did the wallpapering with their favourite movie star.
Flower paste.
With the flower paste. We did the wallpapering.
Okay, so that pretty much brings me to the end of this presentation. So there's lots and lots here that I haven't touched on. I haven't touched on things like ownership, IP, digital sovereignty, permission, control. There's so much here that I haven't talked about. But hopefully here, what we're kind of really zeroing in on is this idea of the locative audio narrative and the locative storytelling toolkit that allows us to play with these types of narrative. So again, Soundtrails is just one example of how we're approaching this. But I do think that by us having worked so much with communities and with organisations, we are sort of, there's a slightly different contract for us, and that we do have a responsibility and an ongoing duty of care, I think, to work alongside people to manage expectations. So hopefully you've got an understanding of what the sort of the opportunities, the toolkit is within the locative audio toolkit, palette. Yeah, hopefully you've got an idea as to kind of what's going on, and I think we're about time, are we, Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Hamish. That was fascinating. I'm going to ask for any questions or comments. Now, if you've got a question, I'm going to ask you to hold this little microphone, because that means your voice is going out to Zoom and being recorded. And if anyone online would like to ask a question, please use the chat function and I'll read out your question. Yeah, Steve.
It's just a small thing, really, a clarification. What do you mean by apogee points? I know you mean key points in a narrative, but I don't understand the word itself and its use.
Well,
thank you.
It was something like Portland. You've got this remarkable sort of industrial sort of complex that's a shadow of itself, that most of it's gone. But you've got certain points that would allow listeners really to sort of go in to a place. And I think you get certain opportunities when you're doing this kind of work. And I think for me, when I was using the word apogee, I guess, yeah, kind of like, climactic points within a narrative. I guess the quarry affords for me a climactic sort of part of that narrative. And that's because you've got this incredibly powerful metaphor, this water there that's deep, it's 200 feet deep, it's super clear, and it sort of reflects in some ways this sort of sunken history. There's still machinery that lies underneath the surface of that water. There's so many men who died in that particular pit. It's the kind of the holder of this. And what's more, you've got 10 minutes to walk around it. So it really, in some ways, provides, I guess, one of those beautiful opportunities which you don't get that often in locative audio. So that's why I was using that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hamish. That was really, really insightful, because it made me understand the potential, actually, of locative audio in a very clear way. And you mentioned resonance a lot, and I think that sort of unique characteristic of sound being resonance and how that links to temporality. And I was sort of wondering about, is anyone using the technology, using layers of sound, almost like channels of sound, where you can hear different times of a place or competing histories of a place, or is that kind of interactivity being used? Is it possible?
There's ways that you can calibrate, for example, with Soundtrails, we can say this story will play first. As soon as this one's finished, this one will play after that one, and this one will play after it. But you have to be careful here getting too sort of, tricksy, because I think really in some ways you could do all of that within the same sound mix. You could just make it a longer sound mix. So I guess we have the opportunity to layer different stories, but if it all becomes around the functionality and the sort of the bells and whistles on the functionality, I think you can forget the fact that it's also about just, foundational audio production and storytelling. So we have the possibility, and we often layer audio fields. We might have one that you walk into and it plays. As soon as that one's finished, then another one takes over, and that might be on a loop, and then, whatever. Each locative audio app that's out there, well, the more sophisticated ones like sonic maps or echoes, they'll have that functionality in there. The more basic ones, and there's a stack of basic ones out there, they'll basically be just you walk into a field and it plays. Walk out. Another one down the road, 100 meters, another audio field will play. And that's sort of playing much more to this idea of a museum tour. It's playing much more to the idea of, at a certain point, you get information. And people are generally coming at this now through writing a script, and they'll simply record it. There won't really be any sense of creating a layered, textured, sort of resonant connection between the voices and the stories. And I think that's where, kind of what you're talking about can happen. But I think you do need to be careful about making it too complex.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Further questions or comments? There's a, Bettina has said, Hamish, time layers, remember winner of Sound.
Oh, right, yeah.
I think that's to you.
But,
Telegram.
Yeah, I mean, we were shortlisted. So every year they have this Soundwalk September competition. I talked about that before. 2 of our projects were shortlisted for that. Unfortunately, we didn't win it. The winner was a fantastic project, and it was actually a very simple project. For all the production that we've been involved with, you can see sometimes the simple art of knowing how to write or knowing how to use your voice can go a long way here in terms of being able to really connect you with the world around you. So that's why I think we're really excited about what the future for this type of storytelling is, and why we've now put out this thing called the Soundtrails Academy, is because the Soundtrails Academy now allow something like this toolkit to be used for teachers and students to play and make mistakes and explore building these types of experiences where you've got that connection between voices and sound and places. So B's just pointing, that's my business partner, he's asking a question there. B's just pointing out that, yeah, there's this fantastic competition called Soundwalk September. Check it out, and check out some of the other works. Yeah, I think you'll be really surprised.
Hamish, quick question from me. It's striking me that the experience of, listening to one of these stories in place could amplify the emotion that the story brings. For instance, the consent story, like I was already finding that a little, distressing just at a distance. And I'm wondering, you know, what happens when one's actually on the street there, or in relation to, you know, some of those community stories. Again, they're about pretty intense experiences. What happens to emotion with this?
I don't know,
kind of interface?
Paul. I guess everyone's emotion is different. You know, I've got my experience. I guess we seek to make sure that if we're building anything, that it's got the permission of the people who are the community, who sort of, you know, who really, it's their stories, it's their place. You know, we have legal contracts, we have, you know, we're very careful in terms of making sure that we've got the goodwill, the buy-in and ongoing sustainable relationships with these people. But I see your point, and I think that it is a new frontier. And I think people could do, you know, there's that idea of dark tourism, you know, where you go to somewhere and it's sort of voyeuristic. I think that it could easily sort of swing into that area of dark tourism if you weren't careful. I think with something like consent, that there's been a lot of couching that work within a broader education campaign. And I think that that's probably helped offset that. Yeah.
Well, that's the other side of it, I would imagine, is to heighten the possibilities for empathy, learning and so forth. Like that must be one of the things you're working with, yeah? The fact that you really are putting people in a story world in a very, very visceral way.
Yeah. No, it's an exciting area to work in, and I hope, you know, I think particularly if people are working with creative writing, they're working with audio, architecture, archaeology. You know, there's so many applications for this. I think just like the novel has all these genres, I think the locative audio experience has so many. And I think that even if it's been 20 years since locative audio has been up and running, I would say it's really only in the last 4 or 5 years that it's really sort of coming into its own. And I think that these types of narrative structures, these spatial bound narrative structures, people are really only kind of just working now, how they work, partly because there's been so many platforms that have fallen over in the last 15 years, so many platforms. Whereas I think now they're becoming very reliable, very durable, very consistent. And I like to sort of consider that Soundtrails is one of those platforms now. Yeah.
Time for one final comment or question, if anyone would like.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate it. And please do check us out and, you know, send us some feedback. If you want to talk to us later, please do contact us on the website. There's a contact form there. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much.